Imagine for a moment a world where the most infamous serial killer in history is never unmasked, where his name is a placeholder for a phantom that was never given a face. Picture him as a surgeon of nightmares, who performs his grisly work under the cloak of night, and then melts away into the morning fog, leaving behind only terror and a mocking signature. He is less a man and more a ghost story that actually happened. Now, transport yourself from those haunted city streets to the vast, unforgiving wilderness of a snow-choked mountain range. Imagine a team of 9 seasoned hikers, experts in their prime, meeting a bizarre, inexplicable, and horrifyingly violent end in the dead of winter. Their final moments are a puzzle of contradictions, a flight from an unseen threat that was so terrifying they chose to face a frozen wasteland barefoot rather than stay in their shelter for one more second. It's a story where the clues don't add up, and the official explanation feels like a flimsy curtain drawn over a much deeper, darker truth. Finally, let your mind drift back to the very dawn of the American experiment. Imagine an entire colony of people, men, women, and children, who are the hopeful seeds of a new world, simply vanishing from the face of the earth. They aren't lost in a shipwreck or decimated by a visible plague. They are just gone. Their homes are taken down with care. Their belongings have disappeared, and their entire existence is reduced to a single, cryptic word carved into a piece of wood, a message that has echoed in silence for over 400 years. This isn't the carefully constructed plot of a Hollywood horror movie, designed to give you a temporary thrill before the credits roll. These are the real, dark, and profoundly unsettling stories behind some of the most terrifying unsolved cases in all of human history. These are the moments where the neat and orderly narrative of our past breaks down, leaving gaping holes of uncertainty and fear. Today, we're not just telling stories. We're digging into the mysteries that have perpetually stumped the most brilliant investigators and haunted our collective imagination for generations. These enigmas are like locked rooms, but the rooms are entire chapters of history, and the keys have long been lost. What really happened in these chilling historical enigmas? Let's pry open the doors, blow away the dust, and see if we can uncover the terrifying truths that remain just out of reach. Our journey into the abyss begins on the foggy, gaslit streets of Victorian London. In the late 19th century, London was the heart of a global empire, a city literally bursting with life, innovation, and immense wealth. But this gleaming facade was a lie. Like a magnificent piece of fruit rotten to the core, the city's prosperity was shadowed by crushing, abject poverty. In the autumn of 1888, the Whitechapel district, a sprawling, labyrinthine slum in the city's East End, became the personal hunting ground for a phantom who would carve his name into the darkest corner of criminal history. He was a specter of violence in a world already defined by hardship. They called him Jack the Ripper. Between the month of August and November that single year, a string of horrifically violent murders gripped the city in a chokehold of raw, primal fear. The victims shared a tragic and vulnerable existence. They were all women, working as prostitutes to survive in the brutal poverty of the East End. In an era where life was already cheap, their deaths were something else entirely. The attacks were not merely brutal. They were shockingly, unnervingly precise. The killer's method was a chilling ritual. He would first silence his victims by cutting their throats, then proceed to inflict gruesome, systematic mutilations on their bodies. In several of the cases, he removed internal organs with a level of skill and confidence that strongly suggested he possessed detailed anatomical or even surgical knowledge. He wasn't just a frenzied madman. He was a craftsman of death, and his medium was the human body. This macabre proficiency turned the fear into something more specific. Was this a man of medicine, a butcher, someone who understood the intricate map of the human interior, now using his skills for pure evil? The 5 women who are now considered the canonical victims, Marion Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, were butchered in the dark alleyways, shadowed courtyards, and run-down rooms that served as the backdrop of their lives. Each murder escalated the public's terror, but the final act was a crescendo of savagery. Mary Jane Kelly, the last of 5, was murdered in the one place she should have been safe from the horrors of the street, her own small, rented room. The sheer ferocity of the attack was unlike anything seen before. It was a storm of violence unleashed in a tiny space. leaving so little of her recognizable that the scene defied description. It was as if the killer's rage, which had been simmering for months, finally boiled over in one catastrophic, annihilating act. But what truly cemented the Ripper's reign of terror and transformed it into a legend was his sheer, unmitigated audacity. This killer wasn't content to remain a shadow. He wanted a name. He wanted a voice. He began to taunt the very people hunting him, as well as the public he terrorized, by sending a series of letters to newspapers and the overwhelmed Scotland Yard. One of these letters, which opened with the chillingly casual and familiar words, "Dear Boss," was signed with the name that would become an immortal legend, Jack the Ripper. In that single moment, the killer metamorphosed. He was no longer a faceless menace, a nameless fear preying on the vulnerable. He was now a named, almost supernatural bogeyman, a character in a real-life horror story of his own making. The name was like a brand, searing his identity into the public consciousness. He was playing a game with the authorities, and the city of London was the board. The police, in turn, were completely and utterly overwhelmed. They were like men trying to catch smoke with their bare hands. They launched massive, sprawling investigations, cordoning off streets, conducting house-to-house inquiries, and questioning literally thousands of individuals. The list of suspects became a catalog of Victorian society itself, from doctors and butchers, whose skills mirrored the killers, to lawyers, and even, in hushed whispers, members of the royal family. But every lead was a dead end. Every promising suspect was a false dawn. They had nothing but theories, speculation, and a growing pile of bodies. Was he a doctor, using his privileged knowledge for the most evil of purposes? Or was he a simple local man, hiding his monstrous nature behind a mask of utter normalcy, a wolf hiding in plain sight among the sheep? Then, as suddenly and inexplicably as he had first appeared, he was gone. After the butchering of Mary Jane Kelly, the murders simply stopped. The letters, which had fanned the flames of panic, dried up. The phantom who had held the world's greatest city hostage vanished without a trace. Jack the Ripper simply faded back into the London fog from which he had emerged, leaving behind a legacy of pure terror and what is arguably history's greatest unsolved mystery. For over a century, modern investigators have thrown everything they have at the case: advanced DNA analysis, sophisticated geographical and psychological profiling, in countless attempts to finally give the ghost a face. Yet, his true identity remains unknown, a ghost that, in many ways, still haunts the streets of London today. While the Ripper's monstrous shadow still looms large over the cobblestone streets of London, our next mystery transports us from the suffocating confines of crowded city to the vast, desolate, and frozen peaks of Russia's Ural Mountains. There, far from the prying eyes of the world, a very different, and perhaps even stranger, kind of horror was waiting patiently for a group of unsuspecting hikers. This wasn't a case of human evil, but perhaps something far more primal and incomprehensible. In the heart of the Cold War, in January of 1959, a group of 9 exceptionally experienced ski hikers, most of them students and graduates from the esteemed Ural Polytechnical Institute, embarked on a grueling expedition. Their goal was to traverse the remote and formidable northern Ural Mountains, a challenge for even the most skilled outdoorsmen, led by the capable 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov. This was a team of professionals. They were young, brilliant, athletic, and meticulously prepared. They understood the unforgiving nature of the Siberian winter and knew how to handle its harshest conditions. They documented their journey with diaries and photographs, showing a group full of life and confidence. They were never seen alive again. When the group failed to send a telegram from their intended destination, an alarm was raised and a massive search and rescue operation was launched. On the 26th of February, the search party made their first discovery on the slopes of a mountain known as Koletsyakhl. In the language of the indigenous Mansi people, this name is sometimes translated as Dead Mountain, a translation that is still debated by linguists, but one that hangs over the entire affair with an undeniably ominous weight. It was there they found the hikers' abandoned tent. The scene that greeted them was not just tragic. It was profoundly baffling. The first chapter in a story that would defy all logic. The tent, their only protection against the elements, had been sliced open with a knife, but from the inside, all of the group's vital belongings, their boots, their heavy coats, their food and supplies, were all left behind, neatly arranged. The story was written in the snow. A set of footprints leading away from the tent showed that the 9 hikers had fled their shelter in a state of absolute panic. They had plunged out into the sub-zero night, where temperatures likely dropped to minus 30 degrees Celsius, some of them completely barefoot, others wearing only socks or a single shoe. It was an act of suicidal desperation. To abandon warm clothing and shelter in that environment is not a choice. It is a primal, unthinking reaction. It's like a sailor choosing to leap from his ship into a frozen ocean. Whatever they were running from inside the tent, it was somehow more terrifying than the certain death that awaited them outside. The first 2 bodies were found nearly a mile away, under a large, ancient pine tree at the edge of a forest. They were dressed only in their underwear. The remains of a small fire nearby suggested a pathetic, futile attempt to fight off the encroaching cold. 3 more bodies, including that of the group's leader, Igor Dyatlov, were discovered at various points between the pine tree and the abandoned tent. Their positions were haunting, frozen in poses that suggested they were desperately trying to crawl back to the camp they had so violently fled, only to collapse and succumb to hypothermia. At this point, the story was a tragedy, but a seemingly straightforward one. A group of hikers, for some unknown reason, panicked and froze to death. But it took 2 more months for the spring thaw to reveal the final, horrifying piece of the puzzle. The last 4 hikers were found buried under more than 10 feet of snow in a nearby ravine, and it was a condition of these bodies that transformed a tragic accident into a terrifying, enduring mystery. They had suffered horrific, catastrophic internal injuries. One victim, Nicholas DeBow Brignoles, had a major skull fracture. 2 others, Alexander Kolevatov and Semyon Zolotaryov, had crushed chests. An investigator at the time compared the force required to inflict such damage to that of a direct car crash. Most disturbingly of all, one of the victims, Ludmila Dubinina, was found missing her tongue, and both she and Semyon Zolotaryov were missing their eyes. Yet, perplexingly, there were almost no external wounds or signs of a struggle on their bodies. Their injuries were internal, as if they had been crushed by an immense, invisible force. While 3 of these last 4 hikers were found more adequately dressed than their friends, it's widely believed it was because they had taken the clothes from their companions who had already died, a grim and desperate act of survival. The official Soviet investigation was conspicuously short and frustratingly vague. After a brief inquiry, the case was closed, with the official cause of death listed as the result of a compelling natural force. This explanation explained nothing, and only served to fuel decades of intense speculation. The file was classified and hidden away, a bureaucratic shrug in the face of the incomprehensible. The theories born from this vacuum of information have ranged from the plausible to the paranormal. Some point to a rare type of avalanche or infrasound, low-frequency noise that can induce feelings of panic and dread, being generated by a strange wind pattern around the mountain. Others suggest a secret military weapons test gone horribly wrong, which might explain the bizarre reports of strange orange spheres in the sky that night and the traces of low-level radiation found on some of the hikers' clothing. The radiation was never explained, though it wasn't considered lethal. And of course, there are the more fringe theories, an encounter with a Yeti or some other unknown creature. In recent years, new computer modeling and research have lent support to the idea of a slab avalanche, a specific, delayed type of snow slide that could have crashed down on the tent. Proponents of this theory suggest it could have caused internal injuries without leaving many external marks and forced a panicked, frantic escape. It is a neat theory, an attempt to impose order on chaos. But even that doesn't fully explain everything. It does explain the selective and bizarre soft tissue injuries, like the missing tongue. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains a chilling testament to the unknown forces, be they natural, man-made, or otherwise, that can lurk in the world's most remote and desolate corners, a story that stands as a monument to the terrifying idea that some questions simply cannot be answered. The fate of the 9 Dyatlov hikers is a horrifying story of a small, isolated group lost to a terrifying and unknown event. It is a mystery contained to one snowy mountainside, a single moment of inexplicable terror. But what happens when the mystery is not a group, but an entire community? What happens when the vanishing act is so complete that it leaves a hole in the very fabric of history? For our final case, We're going back to the very beginning of American history, to a mystery that has endured for over 400 years and has become the nation's founding ghost story. In the year 1587, more than 20 years before the famous Jamestown settlement would be founded, and 3 decades before the Mayflower would reach Plymouth Rock, a group of 115 English men, women, and children attempted to build a permanent life for themselves on Roanoke Island, nestled in the outer banks of what is now North Carolina. This was a monumental undertaking, meant to be the first permanent English foothold in the vast, intimidating expanse of the New World. It was a dream of an empire entrusted to a small band of pioneers. The colony's governor, an artist named John White, sailed back to England later that year to secure much-needed supplies and reinforcements, leaving behind his entire family, his wife, his daughter Eleanor, and his infant granddaughter, Virginia Dare, who held the historic distinction of being the first English child born in the Americas. But John White's return trip became a nightmare of circumstance. His mission for supplies collided with a national crisis. England was on the brink of war with a formidable Spanish armada. Every available ship, including his, was commandeered for the war effort, leaving him stranded, an unwilling spectator to his colony's fate from across an entire ocean. It was like watching a house burn from a boat you cannot steer, an exercise in complete and utter helplessness. When he was finally able to secure passage and make his way back to Roanoke, it was August of 1590. 3 long, agonizing years had passed. He arrived to find the settlement utterly and eerily empty. It was not a scene of destruction, but one of profound and unsettling absence. The houses and shelters had been carefully dismantled, not burned or smashed. All the cannons, boats, and heavy equipment were gone. There was no sign of a battle, no skeletons, no bloodstains, nothing to even hint at what might have happened to the 115 people he had left behind. They had vanished as if they were a mirage all along. The only clue left behind was a single, cryptic word carved into a wooden post of the fort's palisade, Croton. As if for emphasis, the letters Ciaro were also found carved on a nearby tree. For White, this word was not a complete mystery. It was both a beacon of hope and a source of deep frustration. Croton was the name of a nearby island, what we call Hatteras Island today, which was south of Roanoke, and home to a Native American tribe that had been friendly to the English. Before he had departed for England, White and the colonists had specifically agreed on a contingency plan. If they had to move from Roanoke for any reason, they would carve their destination into a prominent place. They also agreed to add a Maltese cross if they were in danger or had been forced to leave. To White's immense relief, there was no cross. The message seemed to indicate a planned, peaceful relocation, but he never got to find out for sure. As his search party prepared to make the journey south to Croton, a massive storm, a hurricane, began to roll in. The winds howled and the sea churned violently. His crew, already weary from the long Atlantic crossing, refused to risk the dangerous journey in their damaged ships. Their anchors were lost, their supplies were low, and they would not press on. With an impossibly heavy heart, John White had no choice but to abandon the search and sail back to England defeated. He would never see his family again, and he would die never knowing what became of his daughter, his granddaughter, and the entire colony he was meant to lead. So, what happened to the Lost Colony of Roanoke? For centuries, the question has been a source of endless fascination and speculation. The strongest and most widely accepted theory is that the colonists, likely facing starvation and dwindling resources, made the logical choice to go and live with the friendly Croton people. They chose to assimilate rather than to perish. This theory has been given a great deal of new weight by recent archaeological finds on Hatteras Island. Excavations have unearthed European pottery, pieces of English flintlock muskets, and metalworking flakes mixed directly with Native American artifacts from the correct time period. These finds are like faint historical footprints, suggesting the colonists may have simply moved, integrated, and gradually blended their lives and culture with their Native American hosts. In this version of the story, the colony wasn't lost. It was absorbed, like a river merging into a larger sea. Other theories, however, are much darker. Some historians believe the colonists were wiped out by a more hostile tribe, perhaps after moving inland. Others point to compelling evidence of severe, multi-year drought that was hitting the region at that exact time. A silent, invisible killer that could have led to widespread famine and disease. Still others wonder if the colonists, in their desperation, try to repair their own small ship, the pinnace, and make a doomed attempt to sail back to England on their own, only to be lost to the unforgiving Atlantic. But with no definitive proof, no bodies, and no final message, the 115 men, women, and children of Roanoke simply vanished from the history books, leaving behind a single, strange word in America's oldest, most haunting unsolved mystery. From the grimy, fog-shrouded back alleys of Victorian London to the frozen, God-forsaken wilderness of the Russian mountains, and to the hopeful, sun-drenched shores of a brand new world, these cases are a powerful and chilling reminder that some questions might never have answers. They represent three different kinds of terror. The terror of a monster who looks like a man, like Jack the Ripper. The terror of an inexplicable force of nature or the unknown, as in the Dyatlov Pass. And the terror of complete and utter oblivion. The quiet horror of simply being erased, like the Roanoke colony. History, we like to believe, is a book of facts, a timeline of events we can study and understand. But these stories prove that the book has missing pages, whole chapters torn out. It is full of dark corners, locked rooms, and whispers that we can no longer properly hear. Sometimes, the scariest truth is that we may never know the truth at all. The void of the unknown can be more terrifying than any monster. What do you think happened in these cases? Which theory seems most plausible to you for each mystery? Which one of these stories gets under your skin the most? And why? Let us know your theories and your thoughts down in the comments below. We want to hear what you think is lurking in these historical shadows. These stories prove that even in our modern world of forensic science, satellite imaging, and endless data, some secrets are just buried too deep in the past to be exhumed. They have become less like cold cases and more like modern folklore, myths grounded in terrifying reality. It makes you wonder, how many other stories like these are still out there, lost to time, just waiting to be rediscovered? How many other phantoms are still waiting in the fog? Thank you so much for watching until the very end. Stories like this remind us that the past isn't just history. It's a warning and a lesson we can't afford to ignore. If you found this video eye-opening, do me one favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, because we've got more powerful stories coming your way. And remember, every time you like, share, and comment, you help this truth reach more people who need to hear it. I appreciate you for being part of this journey. Stay curious, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next one.